Ichimon Japan is made possible in part by Patreon support, and I just want to say a big thank you to our latest patron, Carl Revilla. So Carl signed up for the $3 a month plus alpha tier, and that means that he's getting access to Japanese plus alpha, my podcast about the Japanese language. The latest episode is about 4 Mora words and meat and potatoes, kind of. So if you want to find out what that's all about, you got to sign up for the $3 a month plus alpha tier. But you could also sign up for the $1 a month tier, and that comes with its own perks like early access to episodes and occasional bonus content. So again, japankyo.com/Patreon. If you can afford to do so, I would greatly appreciate it. And thank you again to Carl. Hey, Tony here, and I just want to add a quick note here at the beginning because I didn't make it explicit in the episode itself. Today, we're going to be talking about pronouns, and just like pretty much every other aspect of the Japanese language, there are tons of exceptions and differences when you start to consider dialects, because of course, there are many dialects throughout Japan, and some of these dialects use some of these pronouns in different ways. So unfortunately, we can't cover every single aspect of this, but just keep this in mind just in case you come across some dialect that uses some of these pronouns in a different way. All right. Anyway, let's get to the episode.
That would be a fun job interview, though. Like, so what did you do after college? Like, oh, I was in a gang for 3 years. That's why I believe I'm qualified to teach your students now.
Well, like, I might be worse. I mean, I was homeless in Cambodia for like a couple of years. And
Welcome to Ichimon Japan. I'm Tony, and
I'm Ryan.
And today we have a special guest, someone who, if you are a listener of Japan Station, my other podcast, you probably already know. He's a stand-up comedian, and when we talked to him last, he was in Canada. Now he's back in Japan, in Tokyo. His name is Shoe Murakami. Welcome, Shoe.
hello, Tony, Ryan. It's a huge honor to be back on the show.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. It's always fun to get to talk to you. So I highly recommend that people go check out, I believe it's episode 45, to find out about your really interesting life. But today we're going to be talking about something not related to your life so much, but I guess you speak Japanese, so it's still kind of related. So
It's pretty related. Yeah, I also speak
in that
Japanese
way
too.
it is. Yeah. So, but anyway, let's introduce the question. So, Ichimon means one question, and every episode on the podcast, we ask one question about Japan or the Japanese language. Today's question is, what first-person pronoun should I use when speaking Japanese? So, Japanese has a lot of different pronouns, right? But mainly we're going to focus on kind of the most commonly used ones. And just to, explain, that's ore, boku, watashi, and then there's a couple of variations of watashi. And we're going to talk a little bit about what they are, how they work, and a little bit of history and some interesting stuff related to that kind of topic, I guess you would say. So let's begin, though. Let's begin with something kind of, I think... most people don't think about this. This is not in your typical Japanese textbook, but... well, this is a very linguistic kind of thing, but I think it's worth highlighting. And Ryan, would you mind explaining whether Japanese even has, pronouns in the first place? Like, do they even exist in Japanese?
No, they don't. End of explanation. Yeah, so syntax actually is my specialty. It's what I focused on in graduate school. So this is a question I like a lot, but... Very, very brief background to not annoy people. Usually people learn like a noun is person, place, or thing. That's not correct. It's what something is determined by how it's used in a sentence. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if I want to go into this much detail. But basically a noun can be a subject of a sentence or the object of a transitive verb, which, of course, pronouns in English also can. Like, I did something, he hit me, whatever, that works. But the difference in a pronoun and a noun is also how they behave. Pronouns kind of behave special in that you cannot modify them in English or in other languages too. But in Japanese, you can modify them. Mm-hmm. For example, in Japanese, it's perfectly natural to say them like ima no watashi, which in English would be like the me of now or something that sounds awkward and unnatural because you're free to modify it in Japanese. But in English, if you try to modify I or me, it sounds really awkward. You can also say something like kono watashi, which would mean like this I or this me, which also just sounds awkward and weird in English. So because you can do that in Japanese, there's not actually any difference between the words we use as pronouns and just traditional nouns, which leads overwhelmingly most syntacticians to say that Japanese does not have pronouns. They're just nouns that are used for the function of pronouns, but they are just nouns.
Yeah.
There are some dissenting people, but they're small.
Yeah. This has been going on for decades, but it keeps coming up again and again. And so, yeah, technically, there might not be any pronouns in Japanese, but for the sake of simplicity, we are just going to refer to them as pronouns. And at the end of the day, actually, the most common pronoun, I think you could argue, is not using a pronoun at all, actually.
The null pronoun.
Yeah. I mean, most of the time, people don't even say like watashi or boku or ore, right? If it's just understood from the context.
Yeah, sometimes I intentionally avoid, like saying any pronouns for myself. Yeah, when I'm talking about myself, I don't have to say that, right? So I don't specify like who I'm mentioning. I mean, I just say onaka suita, which means I'm hungry, but I wouldn't say I'm hungry. I just say hungry. That's the like Japanese way.
Yep. Yeah, it's really common. So, I mean, the answer to the question, what pronoun should I use? Well, first of all, right, try not to use so many pronouns. But, yes, at the end of the day, sometimes you do have to use some pronouns. And actually, the whole reason why we're doing this episode is because one of the patrons asked me a question related to this. And so I wanted to try to answer this. But Ryan, would you mind explaining, Ignacio is the name of the patron. Would you mind reading his message so we get an idea of what he wanted to know?
Sure. Ignacio wrote, "Hi, Tony. I've been told so many times that ore is only used by tough guys. I've just been watching Midnight Diner on Netflix, and almost every male character uses it, even the old men and wimpy characters. So do you think this has really changed, or is it the show making some kind of statement about these characters? Clearly, you've underestimated how tough wimpy Japanese people are."
The wimpiest guy is still very tough.
Yes.
So as we said, some of the most common ones are watashi, kind of gender neutral, boku. Usually guys use that, and then ore is this kind of like tough guy one that usually that's how they teach it to you. So generally, Shoe, which pronouns do you think you use most commonly?
I always change, So I work at a public junior high school, and I definitely use watashi when I talk to other teachers, right? But when I talk to students, especially those like bad kids, I would never say watashi, but I would use ore, because watashi would sound so like vulnerable. And I have, but yeah, that's true that, when I use ore, maybe I like, it's not intentional, but maybe I want to show myself a little bit tougher. So I use ore. Then earlier I said sometimes I avoid like using any pronoun for myself, because sometimes I don't know which one to use depending on the situation, So at work, I should definitely use watashi at work. But when I'm hanging out with friends, I wouldn't use watashi. But sometimes, like when the friend is really close, I would definitely use ore. But when the friend is not so close, maybe I would use boku. And it's really confusing. Like, what's the border? Like, what is it? So that's why sometimes I intentionally avoid using any like pronoun. Like when I'm confused and don't know which one to use for this certain person.
That's why Pro Drop started in Japanese, is because people didn't know which one to use.
Yeah, Japanese had so many pronouns that people were just like, no, I'm just going to stop using pronouns. And that's how that...
Yeah, because it's too complicated.
Yeah, I don't want to think about it.
Like if you don't know how to indicate yourself, just point to yourself and then start talking without a pronoun.
Yeah, you got to point to your nose, because that's how Japanese people point to, right? You got to point to your nose, and then that's your pronoun.
Actually, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, sometimes, like I don't want to, make a mistake. So I just don't use it.
Yeah.
And that's so true, actually. Growing up, I sometimes realize
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've done stuff like that too, where like Japanese, it's easy to leave stuff out. So if I'm not sure how to say something, I can say it a different way by just making it shorter and not saying certain things.
Yeah. It's all an effort to not communicate.
Yes. No, it's an effort to make the listener think more.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we want to encourage free thinking and stuff. So.
Figure out what I'm trying to say, please. Yeah.
Well, I just want to, tell you one thing. So, kids, usually, really little kids, use boku as the first, person pronoun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at some certain age, they change it to ore because it sound because boku sound kind of like naive, so that those boys would change it to ore at some certain age. I don't remember when I did it, but like 3-year-old, 5-year-old boys, they would use boku.
Yeah.
But when I was going to a kindergarten, there was a really strong boy among us, and he first started using ore among us. Then he was actually a little stronger than the other boys, and he started using it. So I was kind of wow, I want to use it one day.
So it's almost like a coming of age thing, kind of.
Yeah, of 5 or 6.
Yeah, of a very young age.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It would be great if you remembered the exact date, like it was July 14th, 1998.
Yeah, that's when I
10 a.m.
changed it to ore. I became a man.
I woke up and said,
boy.
"Good morning, Okasan. From today on, I am ore." And she just started clapping.
Oh, ore ni
Right,
natta!
Yeah, that's what happens, to boys. I don't know about girls, but yeah.
Yeah. So let me give a little bit more context for ore then. So ore might be very old. There's kind of debate about this. Maybe it's two different ores that were coincidentally the same sound, and so maybe it's two different things. But according to one source, it seems like it may be as old as the before let's say the 700s and older. So at least as old as the 700s. So the Nara period and older. And it might have come from onore. So onore got shortened to ore. Maybe. I also saw another theory that it came from ware. So ware is another pronoun, and ware became ore. So you see how the re and the re are the same, right? So maybe could be one or the other, but it seems to have started out as a second person pronoun, and then over time, around the Kamakura Muromachi period, it became the first person pronoun ore that we know today. And around that time as well, especially before the Edo period, but into the Edo period, it seems like both men and women were using it as well. Yeah. So I'm not sure if it was really everybody, the nobles and the peasants and the poor people and the rich people. I'm not sure, but it was pretty widespread that even women were using ore at the time. But by around the end of the Edo period, it seems that it really started to become more of a man, a pronoun used by men. And one theory is that because women started going to school and getting education, then in the schools they were teaching them this is how women should speak, you should not use ore, and so that helped push the transition to ore becoming purely something that only men use. So it's just really interesting, how ore just changed from second to first person. Probably that's a little bit debated, I think, but the kanji changed, and then also ore was being used by women as well. So that just shows how language is kind of an illusion. It is what it is at this moment, but it may not be the same thing 200, 300 years from now, right?
That is very true of language. Though if it did come from ware, then it was always first person.
True. Yeah. So that's why there's a little bit of debate about the history, but either way, it does seem like ore has a lot more history than, for example, boku, which is the next one that we're going to talk about.
That was invented in 1984.
Well, it wasn't that. Well,
No, that's
it's
not
not
true.
that old. It wasn't 1984, but
I just wanted to act like there was some company out there that's like, check out our new pronoun on the shelves now.
so now one thing that as we were talking about, like what is ore like for tough guys? When do you use it? Is it casual? And like there's truth to all of that, but like linguistic research has like two ways of kind of analyzing something. Either you look at real world data, so you record people and how they speak, and then you analyze like what they say, or you take surveys and that kind of stuff. And so I looked at various surveys. And for example, one, which was a very informal survey, it was a Japanese YouTube video, but they were asking, this woman was asking other women on the street, what do you prefer, guys that say ore or guys that say boku? And something really interesting was like the way that they described the adjectives that they used for the men that use these pronouns. So for ore, they used words like otokopoi, which is kind of like manly,
Masculine,
or they also used kakkoi, which is cool, right? So ore, generally speaking, has this sort of compared to boku, a more sort of like Shu was saying, a kind of stronger sense of it, which can sound confident, can sound cool. It might sound arrogant in some situations, and maybe that's why you don't want to use it to somebody that you should show respect to. So depending on the situation that you're in, these attributes, these characteristics can be interpreted in a different way.
For sure, yeah.
So just one last thing before we move to boku that I wanted to mention was that there's this idea it's more than linguistics, but in sociolinguistics we use it. It's called direct index versus indirect index. Don't worry about too much what that, the terms itself, but that means that yes, ore is equals guys, all right? Usually guys say ore, but it's not that ore is masculine. It's that ore is associated with certain like characteristics, like we were saying, arrogant or confident or strong, that in society are associated with men, right? Men should be strong. Men should be confident. Men should be blah, 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 right? So therefore, people think that ore should be only for men.
Yeah.
So it's like A equals B, B equals C, right?
Yeah, I was hoping we'd go down this path, because I would say like its direct index would probably just be like casual or not formal. But in society, the people who do that tend to be like confident, masculine people more so. I mean, anyone can do that, but usually the image of women is that they're more formal and polite and whatnot. So it ends up being associated with masculinity, though it doesn't directly mean masculinity.
Right, yeah. And there are some women that do use ore. There is research that points to that. That does happen. It's still much rarer, but it happens. Shu, can you remember if you've ever spoken to a woman that was using ore?
There was one in elementary school.
Oh,
and she was learning kendo. And her first person pronoun was ore. So maybe like she wanted to, show that, show her strongness or something.
Yeah. I actually want to ask Shu this, since you're our native speaker. From my experience, I feel like when I meet women who want to convey like the more tough or more confident attitude, I think they do use different pronouns, just not ore. Because I met like the women I know who convey that attitude often use something like uchi or jibun instead of watashi.
Uchi is commonly used among women, but it's more like in like Kansai area, like west.
Okay, I'm biased by where I've
area,
lived.
but but uchi, it is used commonly by women. But then again, uchi is kind of like boku for boys. So like uchi is not used in a formal situation. But only among friends or in a casual situation. And uchi can be used by like guys as well.
Yeah.
But it sounds more naive, even more naive than boku.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it could sound like a little okama. Do you know what okama means in
Well,
Japanese?
okama would typically be kind of like gay, effeminate, gay, something along those lines,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah, well, it doesn't necessarily mean like gay.
right,
But like
right.
feminine
Okama is
person.
yeah, feminine like person.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there was another like boy in elementary school that I went to as a kid, and yeah, he would call himself Uchi,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone assumed that he would be an okama.
Mm-hmm.
So we were so surprised when he started playing American football in high school. He was actually a really strong guy, but he wouldn't
Yeah.
call it ore, but yeah, he would call himself Uchi.
That is
That's a
interesting.
great example. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that shows that, I mean, people have many different reasons for why they choose the pronouns that they choose, right? And it's not always like a gender thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Who knows why he chose Uchi in that moment, you know?
Yeah, I wish, like, I have a feeling if you directly ask him, he'll probably just be like, I don't know, it just felt right. But I wish people could, like, clearly rationalize why they make the choices they make.
Yeah. Yeah. It's complicated. I mean, there's many different reasons sometimes,
So
right?
complicated, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, let's take a break here and then we'll come back and we'll talk about boku and the others as well. Hey, so just a few things before we get back into the show. First of all, if you haven't done so yet, make sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss any future episodes. By the way, I release episodes on the 7th and the 21st of the month. So normally I release 2 episodes a month. There may be an exception here or there, but for the time being, 7th and 21st is when these episodes come out. But you won't have to remember that if you subscribe. They'll just be delivered to your device like magic. Also, make sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast platform you use. That does help the show keep on growing. And you can also follow on Facebook and Twitter at Japankyo News. Also, if you want to support the show financially, but you don't feel like buying a t-shirt from kimitodesigns.com, that's Kimito designs.com, or becoming a patron, that's totally fine. If you happen to use Amazon, well, you can use the Amazon affiliate link, japankyo.com/Amazon. And then what happens is that Amazon ends up sending a tiny percentage of whatever you purchase over here so that I keep on doing what I'm doing and it won't cost you anything extra. So again, japankyo.com/Amazon, and then you do your shopping like normal. One last thing, if you haven't listened to the latest episode of Japan Station, go check it out. It's a pretty interesting one. That's episode 60, and it's all about the Shinsengumi, which is one of the most famous groups of samurai in Japanese history, I think you could say. They have a very interesting and bloody history, and I talk about it with Romulus Hillsborough, who is an expert on the subject. He wrote a book all about it. It's called The Shogun's Last Samurai Corps. So if you want to go learn more about that, then go check out japanstationpodcast.com or look it up in your podcast app of choice. All right, so let's get back into the pronouns. So let's talk a little bit about boku. I have to admit that
So
is
we're
the
going to talk
one
about
that
you?
I
Okay.
yeah, basically, yeah. Let's talk about me. Yeah, boku. Let's talk about boku. Boku-chan wa ne.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever used Boku-chan.
Boku-chan is a
Neither.
variation that sounds very cute and only used really by children. Or I've seen a couple YouTubers and like a couple, people that put on a character basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a friend who was, like, when I worked at Eikaiwa, who was probably like in his 50s, and he would occasionally sarcastically refer to himself as atai.
Atai.
That's a weird one. But
Yeah,
I've
that's
heard of-
another
yeah.
one. That's
Not
not
common
used
at
that
all.
commonly, but yeah.
And it was done for, like, self-depreciating humor, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, a lot of the not so common pronouns are used for humor.
Yes.
But anyway, boku. That's the one that I use the most often, I think. But it is fairly common. It's generally used by men, men, going back to that video that I mentioned earlier about the like street interviews, this one was really interview because they would ask the women about like what man would they prefer, one that uses ore or boku. And when the women were describing boku, they used words like kodomo poi, like childish, or like yowaso, like sounds kind of weak. Or osanai kanji, which again sounds kind of like childish. Teine, which is kind of like formal. So yeah, basically it might sound a bit formal, might sound less imposing. Kind of like ore sounds a little bit more pushy, but boku relative to ore sounds less pushy, a little bit more, restrained. And sometimes, it sounds a little bit childish, like we were talking about, with like little boys make the transition to ore eventually because boku sounds kind of childish, ore sounds kind of like manly, whatever, right? So, Shu, do you ever use boku?
I use boku. I mean, in a casual occasion, I would use either boku or ore. And I mean, in a formal situation, like in my workplace, when I talk to other teachers, I usually use watashi. So it's really easy for me. I don't have to choose like one out of all the other many different ones. In a formal situation, I always use watashi. But yeah, in the classroom when I teach students, I choose like either ore or boku depending on the situation. So like then again, boku means a little like naive or like childish or something. So, and I want to be a teacher who is not like all the other teachers. I sometimes want to be a little rude, but not like super rude, but
like direct or
direct
kind of,
or like strong or something. So like I sometimes use ore.
Yeah.
But in a class like where all the students are really like quiet, there's no bad kids, then I would use boku. So that it's not offensive. When there's one class, I mean I teach different classes. So there's one class where there are a couple bad boys, like loud kids. So I want to be a little offensive, so I would use ore as a first person pronoun. But when I teach this really quiet class with really quiet kids, I would use boku, so it's much less offensive. Or
right.
But I wouldn't use watashi because it's like, I don't know, like watashi is usually for women. In a formal occasion, watashi is for everyone, but I wouldn't use watashi to students.
Can I ask a question?
Be, like too formal. Yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
Out of curiosity, let's say it's not like a normal class, but you're having an assembly where the entire student body, like 300, 400 students are all there, and then you're talking to the entire school. Would that change like what pronoun you'd use at all?
Well, I would use watashi because it's like the most neutral one, and there would be like other teachers as well.
Okay, that's kind of what I was suspecting. So like it is possible to use it with students, but it would be more in like a formal assembly thing rather than like a classroom setting.
Well, it's another complicated situation. Like when I'm in the classroom teaching kids, I would always use ore or boku. But if there is another teacher like observing the class, or if there is the head teacher, or some other adults, I would use watashi.
I understand your reasoning completely, but if you really want to be like GTO, you need to always go with ore.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, GTO is the reason why I became a teacher. So GTO is a great teacher on Izuka, FYI. Yeah. He used to be a gang member or the leader of a gang group.
So also you should probably go join a gang.
Too late. He already became a teacher.
I know, but
it's out of order, but it still works.
I wish, but I can. That's not a real,
not
real
possible.
thing. I mean, if I did it in the real world, I mean, I would be fired in the first day. So
Exactly.
That would be a fun job interview, though. Like, so what did you do after college? Like, oh, I was in a gang for 3 years. That's why I believe I'm qualified to teach your students now.
well, like I might be worse. I mean, I was homeless in Cambodia for like a couple of years, and yeah, I became a stand-up comedian in Canada. So I might be worse, but anyway, there needs a balance, you know. So from students, I want to act cool.
Exactly.
But so I would even use ore, which would not be used by any other teachers. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
I have met teachers who use ore, but it's definitely a minority. Like in front of students, I mean.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
In fact, I can only really think of one.
Yeah. And one thing that's important to point out here is that when you switch pronouns, for example, from boku to ore, a lot of times you will also switch, for example, the verb endings that you're using or certain words that you're using, right? So, it'll sound strange if the rest of your sentence is very formal, but you're using, ore in every single situation. So, there's a lot of changes that come with a change of pronoun. It's not simply changing the pronoun.
Wow, I never realized it actually. Yeah. But maybe I do that. Yeah, and I change.
I'm sure. Yeah. And it'll also probably depend on whether like you're speaking ore with your friends or maybe ore with the students, right? Like there may be like a little bit more desmas with ore if you're talking to students or certain people, but there may be less desmas but ore with your friends, right? So it really it's complicated. It's complicated.
Yeah, it's a whole bunch of things, and I'm starting to feel that no one really knows exactly when to do what.
No. Nobody really knows. Everybody just kind of guesses.
I wouldn't like consciously do that, but I think I do. Yeah.
Yeah, and
when
that's
I switch
why
pronouns. Yeah.
That's why, like, when you research language, it's really important to record people speaking instead of just asking, like, what do you say? Because you can't remember every little thing that you say, right? But when you record people speaking, then you know, like, oh, look, you say this, you say this, you say this. And so that's why it's important to get both sides when you're researching.
To give an example, which will probably be meaningless to the audience, but may be interesting to Shoe, I remember when we were in graduate school, there was a study that was going over masculine sentence final particles, specifically zo and ze. And when they ask people, like, who uses this, everyone's like, oh, only men use it, women never. And it's uncommon but around. But then when they actually recorded, men and women both used it equally, and it was more rare than they thought.
Really? Zo and ze? I thought that's only for, like, man.
The image is that, well, I think both, they didn't really provide, like, when it was, but my theory is that both of them kind of use it sarcastically.
Yeah.
But they use it, like, to equal rates, because I believe out of the, like,
interesting,
however many hours it was, like, there was 2 usage of it for the women and 2 usages for the men, so it was still really, really low, but they did both use it.
Interesting.
A lot of times, people say, like, I don't say that, but then you record them and like, yep, they said it.
Even in English, I had a friend who swore that he never used contractions, like won't instead of will not. And when he said that, I was like, there's no way that's true. So, like, for the next 3 days, anytime he did it, I pointed it out to him until he eventually got annoyed. And I was like, yeah, okay, I guess I do use them.
All right. Let me go into the history of boku briefly before we move on to watashi. But boku has a really interesting history. And as I was saying earlier, it's much more recent. But it seems to have come from Chinese. And it meant something like manservant or servant. And then in Edo period, it started to be used in writing. And then it was around the Meiji period when students really popularized it. And so it went from just normal noun, so servant, something like that, to like a kind of humble sort of way of referring to oneself. But it wasn't really a pronoun. It was like saying your humble servant, something like that.
Yeah, so like
right?
if you're talking to your lord, referring to yourself as a servant.
Yeah. So it's not like a true pronoun, but it's approaching that. And then it became formally a pronoun, like legitimately in 1953, I think. When the Japanese government said that it is now a pronoun. That's crazy,
if only
right?
I'd been there to be like, there are no pronouns in Japanese.
But yeah, the Japanese government said, yep, this is a pronoun. So interesting thing that happened though was that as we were saying, like there's this kind of association with boku being kind of like a formal sort of thing, and because the students were using it in the Meiji period, and they were kind of thought of as these like heroic figures at the time, so boku came to be seen as this kind of like idea of manliness. But then later on, when ore, after the war, after World War II, ore came to be the more popular option for men. And the students, that sort of idea of the students that they had kind of been the symbols of heroes, that kind of fell in popularity. So manliness came to be associated more with ore, and boku came to be associated more with like weakness and maybe like formality. So it's kind of like what we've been talking about, how it's all like a comparison, right? Like if you want to sound manly, you have ore, but boku doesn't sound manly, like 100% manly. It sounds kind of maybe weak, maybe childish, maybe it has all these other properties associated with it instead of just manly. And so that's why I think a lot of guys end up using ore, because boku has this other kind of associations with it that maybe in a lot of situations Japanese guys don't want, right?
Yeah.
So
and sometime in the future, ore will stop sounding manly and cool and will sound old-fashioned, and then something else will come in.
It's very possible. Yeah, it's very possible.
It's almost certain. It's just a matter of like how many years it'll take.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because of writing, like language does like change a little bit, slower than it used to before, writing became so widespread, but language is still changing constantly, and the way people use pronouns and all this is still changing. So
I agree with you completely, but I think the internet has made it accelerate more.
There is that too. Yes,
sure,
absolutely. Yeah.
So it's kind of a mixture where some things are slower, some things are faster now.
Yes. Shoot, have you heard any women use boku?
Boku can be used by some women. And of course, it sounds really like bowish.
Yeah.
And those women would tend to have like short-cut hair.
Yeah, that does happen. I mean, there is research, for example, in the LGBTQ community, right? Like there's research, for example, I think it was at a lesbian bar where, they actually recorded conversations, and you see how women in those situations are using kind of some language that is associated with men. So there's all kinds of situations where women might use boku or might use ore or other things that are like men's language.
Well, like I remember this girl. She was a tall woman. We went to kindergarten together. And she was calling herself ore, and she was the tallest kid in the kindergarten. So like she was really strong, and her parents really wanted her to be like girl, like more girly.
Girl. Yeah.
So they would like get her wear some dresses every day, a dress or pretty clothes. So in front of the parents, she would use watashi, that first pronoun, like watashi.
Yeah.
But in front, like I was the closest friend to her, so like only in front of me, like when she talks to me, like she would use ore.
Oh wow.
So I kind of knew like like what kind of person she was. Then we went to different elementary schools. Then after 15 years, I met her again. Then like she wasn't like a girl anymore. I mean, she was a boy.
Oh.
So she had all the surgeries and stuff. So like, ever since we were kids, we were little. Only I knew that she was that kind of person using ore to me. But she didn't use ore to any other people.
Yeah, see, that's really, really important to point out. I think that people that use certain pronouns that are not like normal, quote unquote, right? Like they will only use that with sometimes, right, with certain people. They're very picky because they know that, like for what you were saying, like her parents want her to be a girl and she has to speak a certain way, but she felt really comfortable with you, and so she was able to use ore, and she felt okay doing that with you. And so that's why I think a lot of people, they're doing things that are not in the textbooks, right? In the Japanese textbooks,
Yeah.
but it's only with, close friends or, relationships like that where they trust people, right?
For sure, yeah.
Because it takes a lot of, you really have to be brave to, like, for example, you go to a business meeting and you're a girl and you're going to say, I'm going to be ore in every situation, because there's going to be like backlash, maybe your boss says you can't do that and they yell at you. And so you have to like be aware of that. And Japanese people do know that if you don't do what's expected of you, maybe something bad will happen. So they have to hide it or, kind of act a certain way in front of others, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Let's briefly talk about watashi. It's the last one of these like main ones that you hear most often. But watashi is of course the in these ore, boku, watashi is generally considered the most formal. It comes from watakushi, which is even more formal, which most people don't use most of the time. And then there's another variation of watashi, which is atashi, which is generally used by women, but there are exceptions. Some guys might use that for various reasons. But watashi is, as we were saying, kind of the one that men and women can use. But researchers have looked at this. And so, as Shu mentioned earlier, usually in a formal situation, both men and women will use watashi. But guys largely in casual situations will avoid using watashi because it can sound somewhat feminine if you're not in a formal situation.
はい、その通りです。Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So
If I can jump in,
Yep.
So I think Shu has been very valuable giving the Japanese perspective. As an outsider learning, I realized that in most classrooms and textbooks, when you're studying Japanese, they teach watashi as if it is the default you should be using.
Yes.
And it definitely isn't. It's the formal one. Because even now, I have some friends who are like close friends who are foreigners, who are highly proficient Japanese, but they still use watashi and desmasu when they talk with me in Japanese, and it always feels kind of awkward.
Yeah. So one interesting thing that you do, depending on how you speak, is you also show like your closeness with like your in-group, so to speak. So Shu, for example, if you start speaking watashi nanjara desu, watashi desu to your friends all of a sudden, well, one, they're going to be confused, but two, like it might sound kind of cold. Would you agree with that? Like kind of distant? Or would it just sound totally weird because it's your friend? Like what do you think on that?
But actually, before I became a like teacher in Japan, I never had a steady job, right? So I would never, even call myself watashi in a like a formal situation, or I had never been in a formal situation. So like, none of my friends would expect me to use watashi, right? Then I became a teacher. Like I've kind of changed, right? Now I'm a school teacher, getting a monthly salary. Then I am meeting some of my friends at the end of the year for the first time in like 10 years or something. Then if I used watashi, it might not sound weird. They might think like, oh, she welcome to that like that normal
world.
like a regular world.
You're finally
society.
Shakaichin or something.
Yeah, and they might think that I'm really getting into the like Japanese society where I always use watashi. So they might think that like I use watashi in my workplace, so that I even call myself watashi in a like among friends. I mean, not intentionally, but they might use, oh, she's now working in Japan as a salaryman. Welcome. Yeah, that's what they might think.
That's a really good point, especially if you haven't seen somebody for a long time. A lot can happen in your life that makes you change the pronoun that you use, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I was trying to say is that sometimes if you never, like, for example, when you first meet someone, you make a friend or somebody that might be a friend, okay, maybe you start saying watashi, but eventually a lot of people switch to a more casual style of speech if they become good friends, and they stop using watashi and they may switch to ore or boku or atashi or something like that, as well as stop using desmasu if they become good friends, right? But if you never make that switch, sometimes people can think like, oh, why are you being like, what, you don't really want to be friends with me, or like there's
Yeah.
some kind of like psychological wall there.
Especially if they're using casual language towards you, but you
Yeah.
respond back with formal language.
Yeah.
To me,
yeah,
it-
exactly.
Yeah, it feels like there's some kind of push away or something happening there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that I would say that a good piece of advice for any like new language learner is try to copy the person that you're speaking to. If you notice that they're starting to speak more casual to you, try to mimic that instead of
Yeah.
sticking to the watashi wa nantoka desu, right? Like,
Yeah,
try
especially
to
if they
try to
start
become more
dropping
casual.
desmoses or adding like kun or chan to your name, and you're still
Yeah.
responding back for full formality.
Yeah.
Well, I want to give you one example. So I'm a school teacher,
Oh.
and
Yes.
I want to be kind of close to my students, right?
Yeah.
But not too close, because I'm not a friend, right?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
But some of the students, they kind of start thinking that I'm like a friend of them or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
So
too
like
casual, too friendly.
They
Yeah.
talk to me in a really casual way, like they don't even use keigo. So I could be a friend of theirs. Then to avoid it, I would use keigo to them to push them kind of away, or to show that we are now friends.
That's excellent. That is so good. Yeah, Keigo is of course the super honorific language, and using that can almost sound scary sometimes. Like if a mom suddenly starts using Keigo with the kid, they might have done something bad, right?
Right.
It's like being called by your full name. Something bad happened.
Yeah, it's kind of like in English. Yeah, when the mom says like the middle name, like the full name, you're gonna oh, the kid did something bad. Yeah. That's yeah. The way that you use language shows like, oh, this person is a friend. This person is, somebody that should be respected, or you should respect me, or there's all
Yeah.
all kinds of
As we said
nuances.
earlier, language is kind of an illusion, or whatever your wording was, Tony. Like,
Yeah.
there is no inherently polite language, like even keigo. If it's used in the right context, it's polite and formal. If it's used in a different context, it can sound intimidating, or it can even sound rude, honestly, depending on how you're using it.
I never intentionally used keigo to my students, but now I know why I do that.
Yeah.
After you guys explain it to me.
See,
Yeah.
you know all this, Shu. You know it. It's all in your head. It's just that you've never like recorded people speaking and then thought about why did they say it this way.
Right, yeah. I never meant to push my students away by, using keigo, but I now I know that that's my intention.
Yeah, but that's how it is. We all do that without thinking about it. Right now we're all doing it.
Yeah, and as a teacher, I also understand you want like casual, but not too casual with your students.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Like the second they start actually trying to like hang out with you on the weekends, then you've gone too far.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So one little thing here that I do want to mention about watashi before we move on. So one, it used to be like just a noun that meant like private or something like that. Like it then it transitioned into the I guess pronoun. That's what we're calling these things, pronouns that we have now. But
It still kind of has that meaning, like shiritsu.
Yeah, it's still You still hear like for example watakushi right? Like that still does mean like private. For example, when you're talking about a private school. So that meaning does survive, but generally I think it's more common to hear it as a pronoun. And then one
As
other
a
thing,
noun pretending to be a pronoun?
yes, as a noun pretending to be a pronoun. Yes. And then one last thing that about this history kind of stuff is that apparently in the Edo period it was primarily or it was used by women, but like samurai would not use it. So they didn't like it, but it certainly seems to have evolved a little bit since that period.
Were they all busy
but-
wagahaying?
Wagahai or sesha or whatever.
Oh,
There's-
sessha, yeah,
there's so many there's so many other pronouns we're not going to talk about, but so like Ryan said, also there's uchi and jibun, which are also quite common, but can be used by men or women. We're not going to get into that because those are two other profound topics, but also you can there's a very good article about this on tofugu.com. I'll include a link about that for people that want to learn more about this.
There's
but
so many pronouns.
Yes, there's so many pronouns. Yes, yes, yes.
Washi, yo.
But we'll
I've never heard of it. Maybe.
Yo,
Okay,
yo is like
this one I
kings,
think
right?
is not real, but in fiction, because I play a lot of like video games, if you're talking to an old god or like a demon, they might say yo.
Yeah, or kings as well. Yo.
Yeah. It's some kind of ancient, very powerful sound.
Yes, yes,
I don't play video games, so like I never knew that. Yeah, see, like you guys know more about Japanese culture and stuff than like Japanese people.
I just pay close attention because I'm a linguist, and this topic comes up a lot. And the
Well,
first
I
time I
think-
saw yo being used, I was like, what the heck is yo? And then I was like, oh, he's talking about himself.
Well, see, the thing is that for you, it's the other way around, right? Like for us, when we encounter something in Japanese, we wonder, why is it this way? But when you see something in English or hear something in English, you must think like, oh, why did he say this? I wonder what this word is, right?
Yeah. When I first heard like a yo, like in English, I was like, "What's this? Not you. What's this?"
Yeah. So same thing. Same
Why?
thing,
Oh, yeah. It's really casual, like yo.
Yo, what's up?
Yeah.
Yo, what's up? Yeah.
In Japanese, it means totally different.
Yeah. Or like in Kabuki, the yo.
Yo.
All right, so Shu, you had an interesting story that just further illustrates how confusing it can be to like pick a pronoun, like from when you were talking to your parents. Could you can you tell us that story?
Please share your trauma.
Yeah,
So
your
yeah,
trauma, please.
it's a huge trauma that I've never like even told my parents about. Yeah, it was like when I was 6 years old. I remember I was in the first grade in elementary school. I needed a notebook, so I told my father about it. Like I said to him, like need a notebook. I mean notebook, ノートが必要.
Uh-huh.
It literally like translates to like need a notebook. I didn't say any like pronoun
Yeah.
any first because I didn't know which one to pick. I was in that like
In between
around the
stage.
age where
'cause he's like 6
I
years
could
old.
choose ore or boku, so I couldn't like choose one.
Uh-huh.
So I just didn't like say any. I just said need a notebook, and it works in Japanese, right?
Uh-huh.
ノートが必要.
Yeah, that's fine.
ノートが
Yeah.
欲しい.
Yeah, you would understand that easily.
Want a notebook. Yeah, he should have understood. But yeah, like he asked me like for who? Like 誰が使うの? Like who's going to use it? Then I said need a notebook. Have to use a notebook. Like without any like first person pronoun. Then he repeatedly asked me like for who? Like who's going to use it? Who's going to need it? And it was so mean, like I was at that certain age where, like, not adolescence, but, like at 5 or 6 year old, I had that kind of period.
You were still
So-
unsure what to do. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of conversation lasted for like a minute or two. Then I finally said, 僕が, it was really difficult for me. Then it's a huge trauma. Then he said, okay, now I understood. But now that was so mean, and it was a huge trauma. So that even today, I don't know which pronoun to use when I talk to my parents.
Yeah.
Then that trauma made me like no one to talk to my parents anymore, because there would be this situation where I have to like specify like who needs that notebook.
Yeah.
So
And then-
that one little trauma,
Yeah.
that's actually a huge trauma, made me not want to talk to my parents ever again, even like now when I'm like 29 years old.
Yeah.
So for the last 23 years, you just never spoke with them again.
Well, I can talk to them, but like I've never used first person pronoun like when I talk to them. Yeah.
Yeah. That's such a perfect example about like it's not just the Japanese learners like us that don't know what to do sometimes. Like
Well-
even native Japanese speakers are like, "Oh no, but I have to make a decision, but I'm not sure what to do."
Well, I think it's much easier for you guys because you can just pick one. Oh, this is cool, or no, I would.
Well, that's true. That's true.
But there is a little like context in all the stuff, like for Japanese, like because
yeah.
we
I
know
mean-
like we can't explain, like one by one, but we kind of know like what they are.
Yeah, you feel it.
We
You know
just
it,
can't
yeah.
explain
Yeah.
it. So, yeah. So that's one. Yeah, that was a like big like a difficult time for me when I had to
Yeah,
pick
yeah.
one right
Yeah.
there.
I do think foreigners living in Japan, it is a little more similar because it's true. We could just use watashi all the time and no one would question it.
Yeah.
But usually, as you become more proficient and you've been living here longer, you want to be more normal and accepted in Japanese society, so you try to do it too. And then I think it becomes kind of the same thing as it is for natives.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The difference is that with a Japanese learner, you don't kind of understand.
You'll be
all the-
forgiven.
Yeah, well, you're forgiven, and you don't know all the kind of like you don't feel guilty or bad when you say something weird because you don't know that you said something weird. But for a Japanese speaker, they know that they said something weird and they don't want to say something weird, so they feel that pressure not to say something weird.
Yeah. So, I guess there's different levels of learning because, if you're like a beginner, who cares? I'm thinking more for like myself who's been here a long time and plans to be here forever. I no longer want to be seen as the foreigner still like in the learning stages of Japanese. So I try very hard to use what Japanese people would use. So even though no one will react badly if I pick the wrong one, I'll still feel bad like, oh crap, I messed up. I should have used this one to myself.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Because, like I have some friends who call themselves like Sesha, like who's, he's definitely, as you can see, like anime otaku. So that, he just chooses that one, the first, as the first, person pronoun, like Sesha or,
I mean, if I'm joking around, I might throw out an ore-sama, but that would only be with friends for fun.
Right. But
I would never say that at work.
Yeah, I do understand that, Ryan. Yeah. So if some foreigner uses like ore-sama or like sesha, we would just think that they are so into like anime or something.
Yeah.
But if Japanese people used it, it's like super weird. It's
Yeah. One last thing that I wanted to mention was I found this thesis that was really interesting, and it was a case study of the person writing it did several interviews with an advanced Japanese learner, and this person, who she called Matthew, had started learning Japanese, I think in high school, and then went on was a really, really advanced Japanese learner by the time this person was in university. And this person did not identify with either male or female. They didn't want to take a stance. And so they were very good speakers of Japanese. And this person ended up deciding to create a new kanji. So the kanji was the kanji for ore, but so on the left side of ore, there's the radical for ningen, which is a person. But instead of that, this person put the kanji for woman. So the left side is the kanji for woman, and then the right side is the same as ore. So this person, the description of the thesis makes it sound like this person was born female and looks female, but did not want to be called female, even though the name is Matthew. So the thesis never makes it clear, but that's what it describes. And so Matthew ends up using this new kanji, but reading it as ore. And for example, one of Matthew's friends says like, "Oh, you should speak more like a girl. You should speak onnarashiku." And Matthew really did not like that. So one way in which Matthew was able to deal with this problem of having to pick a pronoun is to create their own pronoun. But that, of course, comes with different problems, because if you're in a formal setting and you say ore, they don't know that you're using a different kanji.
Right, yeah.
You're just saying ore, the same ore, right?
You just gotta carry like a flash cat around and be like, no, it's this ore.
No, it's this ore. I created it.
Trust me, this one's formal. We can use it here.
Yeah. And then an interesting thing is that even though Matthew didn't know this when Matthew created the kanji, later Matthew found out that this kanji exists in Chinese.
Ooh.
So you can you can type it in the computer because it exists in the Chinese Unicode. So you can actually type it. And that was the discovery that Matthew came to learn much later. So that was really, really interesting. But it's not, I don't think it's normally used in Chinese these days. It's like an old kanji that is not really still active. But it exists and you can type it. So yeah. If anybody wants to read about that story, I'll include a link in the show notes. But I thought that was really, really interesting.
And what does that Chinese kanji mean? Like a person?
I think it meant something like servant or something like that, like servant or mistress or something like that. So kind of similar to boku, right? I don't remember the exact detail, but it was something like that.
Yeah, boku also like used to mean like servant, a servant.
Yeah.
Boku, the kanji for boku can be, like read as shimobe, which literally means a servant.
Right. Yeah. And then it's still used in some, I mean, I don't hear these words that often, but for example, like a chuboku, I think, that means loyal servant. But I've never heard this word used in like real daily life, but
I use it all the time, man.
What do you do, Ryan?
It's my first person pronoun, actually.
Oh, chuboku.
Loyal servant. Is that what you do?
Nah, I'm just messing around.
So
that's interesting. Yeah, the problem is that unless it's written, nobody knows.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you just say ore, you think it's the same ore, right? Yeah. All right, so let's bring it back to Ignacio's question, just to summarize, and also the main question of the topic for today, which is one: is ore only used by tough guys? No, right? I think we can say no.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it can sound tough, but as we've said, right, there are situations where you only, how can I put it? Maybe this is too extreme, but in some situations, some people might use ore because they don't want to sound childish or maybe innocent or naive and so they're kind of left with ore as the only option.
Yeah. The thing is, ore itself doesn't necessarily mean strong, but compared to boku, ore sounds definitely, like stronger. That's why, some use ore.
Yeah.
So compared to boku, that ore definitely sounds stronger. But ore itself, not comparing to boku, doesn't necessarily mean like strong.
Exactly,
so it can be used by like almost every guy.
Yeah. I think like when you hear tough guy, you immediately start to think like Yakuza or like, Bozozoku or some guy that likes to fight or, like that kind of person, right? But no, it's not only used by that kind of person, right? A lot from, young people to old people to in between, a lot of people use ore.
Yeah, because I had the same perception when I first was studying Japanese outside of Japan, is it's tough, manly man. But then I came here as a teacher and you see like 10-year-old little skinny boy using it and you're like, oh, okay, I guess it doesn't mean that.
Yeah. And then the question of what pronoun should I use? Well, you could first of all try not to use any pronoun.
Chuboku, definitely.
A loyal.
Or yo, be like an ancient king.
Yeah. So first of all, generally you just try not to use a pronoun as much as possible, I think. But when you do have to, it's complicated. It's just totally complicated. And really, it comes down to experimenting, I think, and trying to find what works best for you depending on the situation that you're in.
I will say if you are a foreigner, I think watashi and boku are always safe.
Yeah.
Watashi is safer, I guess.
Yeah.
Because it can be used in a formal situation as well. Boku, well, not always can be like used in a formal situation like a business meeting, but watashi can be used like anywhere.
Yeah.
I've never used ore in a strictly formal setting. I'm not sure if the foreigner forgiveness would also apply there if I just like walked into like a job interview and just called myself ore or something. But
boku could be okay, but ore is not really okay even for foreigners.
Yeah, I feel like that one's beyond the limit, but
yeah.
But I do encourage people who are learning Japanese to try using ore because I think it's not great if you just like always use watashi no matter the context. Like try to judge, is this formal, is this casual, and then try to match it. People will forgive you if you're wrong, but I think that makes you end up with a more natural Japanese than just picking one and using it across the board no matter what.
Yeah. And I mean, As for women, I mean, I think we can do an entire episode on like women's language and that kind of thing, and that is something that I did research on in graduate school, so I would certainly not mind talking about that sort of stuff. But
yeah, it's interesting, but it's much more complicated.
it's certainly very complicated, yeah. And for example, we only briefly mentioned atashi, but you know, there's certain ideas that are, you know, like feminine may sound weak or whatever, and women may not want to sound that way. So that is a whole other complicated issue. And again, we can talk more about that in some other day. But you know, there sometimes there's creative solutions, like in the case of the ore kanji thing that we discussed, or jibun, uchi, you know, other ways. And I think, as we've said multiple times, language is constantly changing, and it will continue to change. And as more and more women, you know, are trying to deal with this issue, you know, maybe other solutions, other pronouns will start to become more popular. So always, it's not just the ones that we talked about. There are others, and there may be new ones in the not too distant future as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
yeah.
Well, I think, you know, maybe, you know, this is one of those questions that you can't answer very simply. It's not like 1 + 1 = 2, but, you know, hopefully we gave some context and some extra information and some information that maybe is not that useful, like whether pronouns are actually pronouns in Japanese. But anyway.
One thing I want to tell you that, you know, recently, like I recently came back to Japan, and, you know, I'm meeting some of my friends for the first time in like years. Then even like now I wonder like which like first person pronoun I should use too, like these people, these friends. Yeah, because I don't remember what, you know, which one I used to use, you know, among those friends and these groups and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, even sometimes even now I think like which one I should choose to like this person, this friend. Yeah, so like when you said, we were going to talk about it, like I was like, oh, like even for Japanese, even for me, Japanese, like Japanese native, it's really complicated. And
That's
I
funny.
still,
Like,
you know, like have some difficult times from time to time.
Yeah, and you have to think back, like, this person, did I use boku? Did I use ore? Like, I don't remember, so I guess I have to pick one.
Yeah. And when I had a girl, like when I was dating this girl, like back in the day, like I would always use boku instead of ore because, you know, I wanted to sound like softer.
Yeah.
I didn't want to sound like bossy or like pushy or manly, so I would, you know, rather choose boku.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's too complicated, and you can explain more about it than I knew.
Those are great examples. I love that because if I start to talk about like in this paper it said this, it's just boring. So thank you so much, Shu, for providing your stories and your extra context.
Well, actually, it was amazing for me to know what I was using without knowing.
Well, if you ever want me to teach you more Japanese, then we'll have you back on the show.
Oh, yeah. That'd be great.
I'm glad we can help each other.
Yeah, we'll help each other. Exactly. All right.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Ryan, anything else you want to mention, or are we good?
Oh, no, I'm good. Thanks for coming as well. That's what I want to say.
Yeah.
And thanks for listening, listeners.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. All the links and all that will be in the show notes. All right. See you next time.
See ya.